Lori sat up in her bed with a yawn and a stretch. She had a read on a few health blogs that an afternoon nap was healthy for a teen girl, and that after that power nap, she could certainly see why she felt completely rejuvenated after just an hour's sleep, or at least she thought it was just an hour of sleep. Glancing over at the clock at her nightstand, Lori was a bit surprised to read it was 6 o'clock. Staring back at her, she could have sworn she dozed off at 3. Yeesh, how did I conk out for that long? Lori made a mental note to set an alarm for herself next time, as she hopped off the bed and walked towards the door. Once she exited out of her room, she caught a whiff of an expensive perfume wafting down the hall. With that, of course, could only mean one thing. Her parents were going out and leaving her in charge. Sure enough, by the time Lori made her way halfway down the stairs, she caught a glimpse of her parents standing in the doorway. The dad in the suit, mom in the dress, giving a wave goodbye to the kids, who were all scattered around the living room, engaged in various different activities. "We'll be back later tonight," Rita said. "Have fun, kids." With that, the two of them just shut the door behind them and went on their way, accelerating the raised eyebrow from Lori. Normally, such a departure would come to a reminder that she was in charge, and Lori couldn't imagine why they'd leave her that part out. Regardless, she just shrugged it off and just assumed that it just slipped their mind. Besides, if her parents weren't going to remind them who was in charge, she was more than happy to do so herself. "All right, listen up," she announced with her usual gravitas, and she reached for the last step of the stairs. "Mom and Dad are gone out for the evening. You know what that means." In the stark of contrast in the reaction she expected, her 10 younger siblings slowly craned their hands towards her, displaying flat, unaffected expressions. Their faces were indicative of, and most mild confusion. "What does that mean, Lori?" asked Lincoln, in a voice that sounded almost mockingly coy. "It means I'm in charge, twerp," barked Lori, outraged and insolence. "So you better start." "But haven't you heard, Lori?" asked Lola. Lori blinked in influmomox over Lola, giving the small gal to interrupt her. "Heard what?" "Mom and Dad changed the rules," Lenny said as she continued. She turned away from Lori and started filing her nails. "They're not leaving you in charge anymore. They think we can handle ourselves." "What?" Lori yelped, as her fingers coiled themselves into fists and veins in her forehead started throbbing. The every idea that they stripped her from the authority, without even telling her, was the borderline of spasmos. "You're lying," she cried, pointing accusingly the finger at Lenny, who in just response just kept her gaze focused on her nails. "You're all lying." Lona took out her phone and placed it on the floor, coolly slid it across the table until it hit lied the eldest's feet. "If you don't believe us, call them up, dude," she said. Lori snatched the phone off the floor and started punching in Rita's cell number. "Well, maybe I will. And then I do, you'll all be in big, A short glance away from the phone revealed Lori's frets hadn't been fazed by any of the children, not even in the slightest. Only a couple of them didn't even bother to look away, and a few of the eyes were just rested upon their bored traces of fear or even surprise. "You know what? It doesn't matter," Lori said, dropping the phone, "because I know for a fact you can't handle yourself. Last time I left the house to you, it literally almost got destroyed." "And we've learned our lesson," Lana said. "We all agree that we're going to be calm and play nice for the next few hours, so you could just run along to your room if you want." Lana clapped her off her remark in a dismissive shoo gesture. Lori gasped and appalled by such a blaze gesture of insubordination, and stomped over to Lana as jets of steam started shooting out of her nostrils. "Now you listen to here, missy," Lori shouted. "If you think I'm just going to go back to my room and trust you all to stay out of trouble, you're literally insane. So I am going to stand here and make sure that the fact is you still have to take the hint. It is quite astonishing to me," interrupted Lisa. "Let me spell it out for you, and in the bluntest way possible. We don't need you." Lori balked and reacted at the Trey's sentence as if it were a consecutive punches to the gut. "What do you mean you don't need me?" she cried, a hint of nervousness entering her voice. Just what she said Lucy, as she rose from the couch and walked straight up to Laurie. We don't need you. You do so. Without me, you. We don't need you, interrupted Lucy. Laurie flinched, each word piercing her skin like a bee sting. Stop saying that this instant, Laurie demanded, in a desperate attempt to assert the authority. At this point, Laurie didn't even care what her parents said. She wasn't going to be talked down to by an 8-year-old girl who only came up to her on the chin. When Laurie looked down at Lucy, she noticed that the top of her head, which was normally stood no higher than Laurie's chest, was now at level with her chin. Did Lucy just go through a growth spurt? Anyone else noticing? We don't need you, Lucy repeated, this time with a sentence. It was echoed by the rest of the siblings, all speaking in the same low, fat monotone as her. Laurie doubled over in pain, collapsing her hands over her ears in all insensible attempt to block out the message. I said stop, she cried, or I'll. When Laurie stood back up, she noticed that her eyes were now at level with Lucy's. The third grader's sister was just somehow as taller as her. We don't need you, repeated the younger siblings. We don't need you. With every repetition of the phrase, Lucy's face seemed to ascend higher and higher beyond Laurie's eye level. Laurie's eyes darted around the room, scanning for any kind of reaction from the rest of the room. How was the rest of the family so interrupted by Lucy so suddenly getting bigger? Then in the midst of her panic, Laurie looked to her right and saw the armchair in the living room, noticing that she could barely see over top of the armrest. The answer hit her like a bag of hammers. Lucy wasn't getting bigger, she was getting smaller. When she turned back towards Lucy, she found out she was now joined with the rest of the family, all grouped together staring down at her while they repeated the cursed 4-word phrase. At this point, to her horror, her height was just barely above Lisa's, as she was still shrinking. Please stop, she begged, though the voice was now octave higher than usual. Sadly, her requests fell on deaf ears. The family continued to chant. She continued to shrink, until Lily towered over towards her. Laurie, with now a heart chilled with fear, backed away from the Titanic siblings, only to trip and fall over a knot in the carpet. Upon sitting up to find what she tripped over her, she was served with the sobering reminder of how very little she had become. The knot, to which it was too small for her to even notice just moments ago, now looked to be the size of a basketball. While she was still reeling from the realization, now the enormous Lincoln stepped forward, bent down and picked her up, gripping her firm, not firm enough to hurt her, but firm enough to remind her how easy it would be for him to squish her. Guys, I think Laurie's getting a little excitable, he said, paying no attention to mind to Laurie as she helplessly pounded her tiny fists against his finger. Maybe it's time we put her away for the night. Laurie gulped. Put me away? She could only dread what Lincoln meant by that, but she figured she had to find out something, whatever she liked it or not. With Laurie squirming in his fists, Lincoln crossed over to the other side of the room, towards the fireplace. Resting on top of the mantelpiece was an empty, lidded glass jar, with a label that read Big Sister on the side. You can't do this to me, Laurie yelled, thrashing about as Lincoln pinched her by the shirt collar, undid the jar, and dangled over her. I'm the oldest. You have to do what I say. Lincoln, not even bothering to respond with anything for more than an eye roll, dropped her into the jar. Laurie desperately tried to reclaim her freedom while she still could. She tried to jump out of the jar, only to find out she couldn't jump nearly high enough to clear it. And most of her fingers could barely graze the rim. The tallest child of the Loud House was now too punny to escape from a foot-tall container. Lincoln just sighed, shook his head, and slapped on the jar lid, stealing her inside. Laurie could do nothing but watch against as he walked back towards the center of the table to join his sisters. Laurie knew that, with her out of the picture, the kids would start spiraling out of control at any moment now. But she saw through the glass. The scene played as she saw what just looked like a tranquil, with mellow as the one she used a moment ago. Lily was playing with blocks. Lisa was helping Lynn with her homework. The twins were playing checkers. Lucy was now reading a book. Lincoln was playing on his 3DS. Luann was in the kitchen making pot pies for dinner. Luna was listening to music, and Lenny was filing her nails. This wasn't a single thing going on, and she could find objectable. Lori's heart sank like a stone once the reality of the situation dawned on her. They didn't need her, not anymore. Not one moment she was respective, a forwardized head of the household. Next, she was an ornament on the mantelpiece with a size to match her significance. Lori's tiny body started trembling with rage and reluctant refusal to accept this new reality welling inside her. She wouldn't accept it. She couldn't accept it. Lori screamed at the top of her lungs, started jumping around and ramming her fists against the glass wall. None of the younger siblings even troubled themselves to look away, either because they couldn't hear her through the jar or because they cared about what her grievances are. With her fury still swelling, Lori then charged at the wall and rammed herself onto it over and over again. In addition, the action would prove to be rather unwise. Just a few seconds later, for one thing, it still failed to attract any attention of the siblings. More importantly, after ramming the wall for the sixth or fifth time, Lori started to feel the floor beneath her wobbling just about it. She looked down to see the bottom of the jar angled with a cautiously over the edge of the mantelpiece. It seemed that in the midst of their tantrum, Lori had failed to notice that she was moving the jar further and further away from the wall. All of her anger in that moment was overtaken by dread. She frantically ran back towards the other end, trying to rebalance the jar, but at that point it was too late. After teetering on the edge of the fraction of the second, the jar slipped off the mantelpiece and plumped downward. The sound of the glass shattering against the floor was the last thing Lori heard before she woke up.